Well, it's been a long time since I've done a shop video, and I know a lot of you like to follow the woodworking that I have. I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of embarrassed about the condition of my shop, and I know you can all relate to that. I've been working and working and working in the shop, but not taking the time to really clean it up. So I'm not going to give you a shop tour, but I think you can kind of hint from over my shoulder that things are getting a little out of control. I blame COVID. In any case, I did take on I'll call it a COVID project. I undertook a project that I wanted to do a long time ago, and I did do a video a few months ago on the start of this project, and I want to share it with you, but I'm going on to the next step. I'm getting pretty close to getting done with this. I am quite proud of this toolbox. This is taken from Christopher Schwartz's book, The Anarchist Toolbox, and it's actually an old world style toolbox. And my purpose for this, let's get a little bit closer here. I've got these really nice handles. The purpose of this is to house all of my favorite old world tools. So just the decision making at what is worthy of this toolbox has been a lot of fun. I've been going through my tools and cleaning them up and getting them all ready and fitting them to the inside. And I'll show you oh, wait a second here. I can't show you that yet. It's almost like spoiling the surprise. But I've got it almost kitted out. One thing that I want to talk to you about a little bit is the next step of this toolbox that I've got to do. And I've got to build 3 sliding tills. I've got 1 till in place. But before I go into that, I want to talk a little bit about the wood that I chose for this toolbox. If any of you are familiar with the Anarchist Toolbox book and the idea of this type of a toolbox, you know that it is traditionally, it's painted on the outside. But because I had a lot of really beautiful woods and I am who I am, I thought, I really want to use some of this beautiful stuff that I've got around. It all started with this piece here. I had 1 piece of walnut that was wide enough to make a big floating panel. And the decision for what would set the panel off was kind of hard. I was going to do walnut with walnut, and I started thinking about it, and I had this really, really beautiful musical instrument grade hard maple that I had. And I thought, that would be kind of an interesting contrast. So the first thing I had to do was build the carcass. And if you go back to the previous video, you'll see how I struggled with all of these little box joints all the way up and down. And I had enough boards to build it. The bottom is all assembled. The bottom is actually in a groove, and it is contained. So it has room for expansion and contraction. Then I've got some cross members that go all the way across on the bottom. But here and here, I went with the traditional way of doing the dovetail joinery. The corners here are typically either dovetailed or through mortise and tenons, but because I have the domino, I use dominoes for that, and I think that that's okay. I'm not super traditional about what I like to do. I kind of wing it. And I had these 3 handles, and these are kind of interesting. These came out of an old bank. It was probably from the 1800s, and the bank was in downtown Los Gatos, and it later got turned into a restaurant. And a good friend of mine did the restoration of the building and turned it into the restaurant. And he had these handles from probably doors or something. And these things have been sitting around for 25 years. And I never knew what to do with them. And they just seemed to be appropriate. So anyway, getting back to the wood that I'm choosing for the trays, the sliding trays, I have quite a bit of old growth redwood, which if you've never worked with this type of wood, it is such a pleasure. Now, this isn't a hardwood. Everything else on this is a hardwood, but I wanted wood that was light enough so that I could lift the trays out. I didn't want to add a lot of weight to the trays. So I had this wood that was wide enough, and I don't know if that's even the right choice of woods to use, but hey, I'm winging it here. So what's really interesting, I should probably take the time and put a piece of white tape across here and count the rings. But if you can see really, really closely, you can tell all the weather patterns and the seasons and the years that we had drought and the years that we had an abundance of rain by how wide the growth rings are. But I counted about 250 years of growth rings in this one 11-inch board. So that means that was a rather significantly old tree. I harvested a bunch of these boards out of a house that was about 80 years old, and it was used as tongue and groove paneling for a wall. At the same time, I don't know if you can see that, but up here, I harvested those were the beams in the ceiling, and they were put in place, and I cut them off and took all the bolts out and everything that's in it. So I've got 8 of those. They're kind of like 4x6s, but they're actually like 3x5.5 or so. But those are really, really old growth, tight grain, no knots, absolutely no knots. And there's virtually no knots in this wood either. This particular piece is straight grain through and through, but this one right here is of the same sort, but this is plain sawn. So you get all the variations in figure. This piece of wood right here is likely the same age as this tree. They might be from the same tree for all I know. But you can see how there's all these subtle variations in the way that the grain goes. Vertical growth wood is more stable than plain sawn wood. However, because these were stored in a house, nailed up against a wall for 80 years, they're pretty dry. So the stability of these pieces of wood, I think, are going to be good. I've got them nice and flat. I ran them through the planer. I sanded them down. They weren't too pretty when I started. So I've brought them all the way down to 5/8 of an inch in thickness. And let me go ahead and show you where I'm going to put them. Let me back up a little bit here before I open up the case. Hold your horses. I am going to eventually do a video from start to finish of this whole project. It'll be a longer video, but I am giving you bits and pieces of what I'm doing. This is something that is almost furniture grade, and I'm almost embarrassed that I'm using it out in the shop, but hey, that's who I am. So anyway, without further ado, there it is. Those are some of my favorite tools, and this is the first sliding tray that I was talking about. And I put these runners in here, and there's another one. You'll see this is just a little bit below this, so I can't have any tools that go above this level here. And I'm going to do a smaller tray and another smaller tray, and they'll go so far that I can access all the bigger planes, the big metal planes, all the old hollows and rounds, and all the hand tools that I've got back in here from ancient times. Most of my chisels that I have decided to put into this collection are really, really old. Almost all of these came from England, from the very first time I went there, which was 30 years ago. And I collected these from what they call car boot sales. We'd call them flea markets here. I'm also quite proud of this collection of hand saws. These are also very old. They're all well over 100 years old. They've all been sharpened. They're all in great shape. I've got a couple of other compartments here that I have not really figured out what I'm going to do with them yet, because it's harder to access the tools under there. So I'll probably put a pull-out box in either of these that'll maybe have sharpening stones or things that I might not use as often. Maybe what I'll do is I'll put in here, I'll put all the tools that I would use to sharpen a handsaw. So in order to get to them, it would mean that I'd have the handsaws out. That's a good idea. A little saw set and maybe some of the files and some of the things that would be appropriate for that set of tools. I do have a small dovetail saw in the back down there. It's a tiny, really, really old one that has yet to be sharpened, but it's worthy of it. And in this area here, I've put some of my marking gauges. There's a real pretty one. It's ebony and brass. I also got this in England. I have no idea how old it is, but I believe this is an old Marples. I'd have to really study it closely. But I made these little pockets for it so everything has a place. There's a wooden one. I've got a few other little things. This is actually, any of you know what this is? This belongs over here because this is a saw set. You put it in there and you'll bend every single tooth out just a little tiny bit, depending upon the thickness of the steel and how far you need to bend it. So every one of these little tiny slots here will bend the tooth just a little bit and then stop all the way down.